Okay, so are you ready to dive into something kind of intriguing? Because today we're going to be looking at Carl Jung and his fascination with astrology.
Okay.
Now, I know what you might be thinking, but before you start pulling out your birth chart and everything, let me just say that this deep dive is not about whether astrology is real or if it can predict your future.
Yeah.
It's more about this. You were super curious about Jung's interest in it.
Right.
And, that's what makes it a little
Huh.
bit unique as a deep dive, right?
Yeah, it is fascinating when you think about it. This is someone who really dedicated his life to trying to build a very respected scientific model of the mind.
Yeah.
And yet he was captivated by this very ancient practice. And what we're trying to do here is unpack what it was that he saw in it. It's like solving a puzzle in a way.
You know me, I love a good puzzle.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think the sources you've shared, I think they give us a lot to work with here because we have the Astrologic source, we've got the Jungian center, and we've also got eternalized.
Yeah.
So a good mix of different perspectives on Jung.
They really do. And, it's not like he just kind of skimmed the surface. He really does have some quite um, kind of strong things to say about it. For example, in one of the sources, he actually calls it the sum of all psychological knowledge of antiquity.
Hmm.
And that's a bold statement coming from a man who revolutionized how we view the mind in the West.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's like he saw this link between the ancient and the modern, right?
Yeah.
But it does kind of lead to the question, how did he even define astrology?
Yeah.
Because we hear astrology and we think of, those birth charts and our sun signs.
Hmm.
But it seems like he was interested in something a little bit deeper than that, right?
Yeah, he was interested in something much deeper than just personality traits based on your sun sign. He talked about it as the chronometric equivalent of individual character. So in a way, what he was interested in is that time itself has different qualities, like flavors. And people born in a particular...
Time with flavors. Okay, I think I'm following.
Yeah, I know it sounds a bit strange, but stick with me.
Okay.
So people born in a particular moment of time are going to be shaped by the unique qualities of that time. So just like wines from a certain year will share characteristics because of that year's specific conditions, people born in a particular moment in time share a kind of psychological flavor based on the qualities of that time.
So you're saying it's not necessarily like the stars themselves that are dictating our destiny, but rather the idea that different periods in time might have different energies or influences that kind of impact us.
Precisely. It's like each moment carries a unique imprint. And to illustrate this, I think the Jungian Center uses a really interesting analogy. Imagine people born around the same time as being like wines from the same vintage year. Just as those wines share certain characteristics due to the conditions of that year, Jung believed people born in a particular moment in time share a kind of psychological flavor based on the qualities of that time.
Wow. Okay. I've got to admit, that's kind of blowing my mind a little bit to think about it like that. Have you ever noticed that, like, looking back on certain years in your own life, it's like a particular year had its own distinct feel,
Yeah.
its own energy that somehow impacted your experiences?
Yeah, it's an intriguing thought, isn't it? And it gets even more fascinating when we consider how Jung connected this idea of qualitative time to his work with archetypes.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. Because archetypes were very central to Jung's theories. But how did he tie those to astrology?
Well, remember that for Jung, archetypes weren't just personality types. They were these universal, unconscious patterns of energy and potential within us, like blueprints for human experience in a way. He saw the planets as representing these archetypes in a symbolic way.
So instead of saying Mars is the god of war, he's saying Mars represents the archetype of assertiveness and drive, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Each planet, in a way, embodies a specific archetype. And here's where it gets really interesting. He believed that the position of these planets at the moment of your birth chart, could provide a kind of symbolic map of the archetypes at play within you.
So instead of telling you what your future holds, your birth chart, according to Jung, is more like a roadmap to understanding those deeper forces within your psyche.
Yes. It's about getting a glimpse into your own internal landscape, those fundamental patterns that influence how you experience and interact with the world.
And this is reminding me of something you mentioned earlier about Jung analyzing hundreds of birth charts. So he wasn't just theorizing about this stuff, he was putting it into practice, right?
Absolutely. The Jungian Center source mentions he analyzed over 800 birth charts, even using them with his patients to gain a deeper understanding of their psychological makeup.
Okay, now that is seriously cool. It's like astrology became another tool in his kit, helping him see things he might have otherwise missed.
And this is where things get even more intriguing when we bring in another one of Jung's famous concepts,
Yeah.
synchronicity. Synchronicity. Those meaningful coincidences that seem to pop up in life.
Oh, absolutely.
Those times when you're thinking about an old friend and suddenly they call you out of the blue.
Yeah, yeah.
Jung was fascinated by these moments.
Absolutely. I've always been drawn to that idea of synchronicity. It's like the universe is winking at you or something. But how did Jung connect that back to astrology?
He saw possible links between those synchronicities we experience and these big astrological cycles that are playing out in the background, these transits, as they're called, the movement of planets in relation to the fixed points of your birth chart.
So was Jung suggesting that these planetary movements were kind of like celestial cues that were actually causing those events in our lives? Like if Mercury's retrograde, that's why my computer crashed.
Not quite. It was more nuanced than that. Jung didn't see it as a simplistic cause and effect relationship. He was more interested in those moments where our inner world and the outer world seem to align in a meaningful way, like there's a sort of resonance between our internal state and these events that are happening externally.
Okay, so it's not about blaming Mercury for our technology woes, but it's more about recognizing those times when it feels like there's a strange synchronicity between what's happening around us and what's happening within us.
Yes. And remember how we were talking about qualitative time? Well, this is where it all ties together. If time itself has these inherent qualities, as Jung proposed, then maybe those astrological cycles, those grand movements of time that are reflected in the stars, they're not so much about predicting specific events, but rather about understanding the broader themes and patterns that might be playing out in a given moment, both individually and collectively.
It's like those astrological cycles are like the background music, setting the tone for a certain period. It's not dictating the plot of our lives, but it's maybe influencing the overall mood or atmosphere.
Hmm.
And this makes me think about something else that the eternalized source mentioned, the idea of astrological ages. I think they said these ages last for over 2,000 years each, and that we're actually transitioning now from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius.
That's right. And that's something that Jung, even with his reservations about traditional astrology, he took very seriously.
Wow.
The Eternalized Source highlights how he even wrote an entire book analyzing this very transition from the Piscean age, which is associated with themes of faith and sacrifice, to the Aquarian age, which is often linked to reason, innovation, and collective consciousness.
Okay, but this is where I get a little lost, because if we're not using astrology to predict the future, then why would Jung be so interested in these massive, millennia-spanning astrological ages?
Because he saw these transitions as representing significant shifts in the collective unconscious itself. Remember, he wasn't just interested in individual psychology, but also in this bigger picture of how human consciousness evolves over time.
So these astrological ages for Jung were like chapters in the human story.
Yeah.
Each age has its own distinct energy and potential, influencing not just individuals, but entire cultures and societies.
Precisely. Think about major historical shifts like the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, even the rise of the digital age. These transitions didn't happen overnight. They were a gradual unfolding, reflecting shifts in collective values, beliefs, and ways of seeing the world.
So it's like those changes were brewing for years, decades, even centuries, reflecting those larger cycles of time that Jung saw reflected in astrology. This is some serious big history stuff we're getting into.
It really is. And the transition between the Piscean and Aquarian ages in particular fascinated Jung. He felt it represented a pivotal moment in human history, a time of immense potential, but also potential upheaval.
So he saw this kind of a make-or-break moment for humanity.
Well, not quite a make-or-break moment, but definitely a time of great transformation.
Yeah.
Think about it. We're seeing rapid technological advancements, a global interconnectedness like never before, and a growing awareness of social justice issues. These are all themes associated with the Aquarian archetype.
That's true. We are living through some pretty intense shifts right now. It's both exciting and, I'll be honest, a little overwhelming sometimes. But this is where Jung's perspective becomes really valuable, right? Because if we can understand these larger cycles and the archetypal energies that are at play, then maybe we can navigate these changes with more awareness and purpose. It's like having a roadmap, even if we don't know the exact destination.
Absolutely. Jung believed that by understanding these archetypal patterns both within ourselves and playing out on the world stage, we could potentially make more conscious choices and create a more fulfilling future.
So after all this talk of archetypes and astrological ages and everything, where does this actually leave us?
Yeah.
What does all this Jungian stuff actually mean for us,
Yeah.
as individuals?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think it's easy to get lost in the weeds a bit with all of these complex ideas. But remember, we started this whole journey, this deep dive, because you were curious about Jung.
Right.
What was he seeing in astrology? And this wasn't about proving it or disproving it. It was about understanding a different way of seeing the world and ourselves within it.
And I have to say, even if I don't fully understand everything we've talked about, it's definitely shifted my perspective a little bit because it's like Jung is offering us this whole new lens through which to view not just our own lives, but this whole human story unfolding over time.
Exactly. And whether or not you subscribe to every single aspect of Jungian theory, I think there's something incredibly powerful about that shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Because when we start to see time itself as this dynamic force imbued with qualities, with these cycles, it changes how we relate to our experiences.
Yeah, and it's like instead of just feeling swept along by random events, we can maybe start to recognize the potential for meaning and synchronicity in our lives. Like those moments where it feels like something bigger is at play. Maybe that's not just our imagination.
Precisely. And that brings us back to one of Jung's really central points, that there's more to life than just what we can see and measure, that there are these deeper archetypal patterns at work within us, shaping our motivations, our relationships, our place in the world.
So instead of just asking, what's my horoscope for today?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should be asking bigger questions like, what are the dominant archetypes at play in my life right now? Or what does this particular moment in time call for from me?
Those are great questions to consider. Because ultimately, I think Jung would say that by understanding these larger forces both within us and around us, we gain a greater sense of agency. We realize that we're not just passive passengers on this journey of life.
We become co-creators.
Yeah.
Like we're still influenced by those deeper patterns and cycles. But by becoming aware of them, we can potentially work with them rather than against them.
Yes. And I think that's a really empowering message, So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave everyone with one final, I guess, provocative thought from Jung himself. If time itself has qualities, as he proposed, and those qualities shape us, what does your birth moment, that unique point in time when you entered the world, say about the potential within you?
Okay, I'm going to need a minute to process that one. It seems like even without giving us a specific prediction, Jung has given us plenty to think about. Thanks for joining us on this exploration. And until next time, keep those minds curious and keep diving deep.